Welcome to Time to Teach with Tammy, the podcast that gives tips, advice, and suggestions to teachers by a real teacher. So sit back and enjoy. And oh yeah, don't forget to subscribe. Welcome back. This is episode 6. Today's episode is called First Things First, You. Now, this is the first episode in our new series, the series for July. This series is called Fast Forward. If you remember, each month we will have a group of episodes, so each week's episode is going to tie into that month's series or theme. So last week we focused on the work and life balance. That was the series for the month of June. And this month, the series is called Fast Forward. So each week we are going to be looking at different topics and give advice and tips and just different things to help you get ready for the fall. So first things first, you. As the title may suggest, today we're going to talk about things that pertain to you and your health, both physical and mental. So some of the things that I bring up today may sound familiar. You may have heard them in the Work and Life Balance series, but there's going to be a little bit of differentiating between the things that you can do specifically for your health and your overall well-being to help you get ready for the fall, as opposed to things that you should do regularly. And of course, the things that I'm going to talk about today are things that you need to do regularly for your own mental and physical health. But I'm going to be discussing different strategies to help you actually make habits of these so that by the fall you have created, and obviously when I say fall, I'm referring to the new school year, so whenever your new school year starts. But basically these will be strategies to help you implement these when the fall comes, because I know it's, as humans, as people, as busy people, it's very easy to say, oh, when things slow down, I'm going to adopt healthier habits, or I'm going to, when things slow down, I'm going to start doing this. But I think the truth of life is that if we think about it, it's always busy. It's always busy, and things don't usually slow down. Typically, what happens is that some busy point stops and then something else starts. That's typically what it is. And specifically as teachers, we know that's true. Yes, we have busier times as a teacher, such as beginning of school year. That's a very busy time. End of school year is a very busy time. Your school is probably similar to mine, where you do benchmarks at specific times of the year. So there's a lot of data gathering, and those are very busy times. But even aside from that, there's always things going on at school. I mean, that's kind of the nature of the beast, is that schools are busy and we teachers are very busy. So if we wait for a slower time in our teacher life, it's just not going to happen. This is pretty much on our summer vacation. This is the slowest pace of our life that we're going to have. So that's why it's very critical that if we are going to implement healthy habits and good habits that promote physical, mental well-being, it's good to establish those now. Trying to make a habit of it right now so that by the time the fall comes, you don't have to put those things off. You've already established it and created a habit, so it becomes easier in the fall. So one of the very first things that I want to talk about is healthy eating. I know we hear this everywhere. I feel like there's so much new information coming out about health, and I say this because I think I might have mentioned this in one of my previous shows, But the whole reason why I started listening to podcasts, it was a couple of years ago, and one of my very good friends introduced me to a show on a podcast show. It was a health show. I forget the name of it. Fat to Fit, I think it was. And at that point, I hadn't been listening to podcasts, but I was just starting to get to the point in my life where I said, I was tired of being tired. I was tired of being overweight. I was tired of coming home and taking a 2-hour nap. Yes, that's a true story. Sorry to say, that was my life for many, many years, coming home exhausted and napping for 2 hours. And I just felt like, I really literally felt like I was napping my life away. Now, perhaps my habit of napping perpetuated my body's need for naps because I was able to break that habit. But basically, that's how I entered the world of podcasts. So I became a podcast consumer through that first show, and of course by listening and getting information about how to change my eating habits and whatnot, I just became an avid fan of podcasts and an avid consumer of podcasts, and it pretty much takes up a lot of my time because I just love podcasts. And if you're listening to this, you're probably a podcast lover as well. But anyway, so through all my listening, and I have now a couple of years of listening to lots of health podcasts, I discovered that there's new discoveries happening in the world of health, which is great, but it was also a little bit surprising because I grew up in the era of low fat. So of course, we all know that when you're eating low fat, you're eating other things. So if they're taking fat out, they're putting sugar in. So I was eating for many, many, many years. I was eating processed foods, sugary foods. I thought I was eating healthy. I was eating the way that it was being promoted, even through, health experts and doctors. Listening to these podcasts, I began to learn that a lot had changed since the 80s and 90s, and I hadn't been up to date on what was healthy. So, there's a lot that has changed, and I know that everyone has their own beliefs on how they should eat, and I am not here to try to convince anyone of a certain type of eating style, even though I have my own beliefs and I am living accordingly now. I'm not here to persuade you one way or the other, but I think we all can agree that healthy eating is super important for your health. There's no debate when it comes to that. The debate then would be, well, what's healthy, what's healthier, and what's healthiest? And again, I'm not going to try to convince you one way or the other, but again, we can agree that processed foods, manufactured foods, a food substance or food stuff that's made in a factory is not real. And if it's not real, there are probably better, healthier options. So that's the only thing that I am going to try to touch on today. Because I think that's a given. We know that. If a food is being processed, if a food is being created, it's not real, it's not healthy, and many times it is engineered and designed to get you to want more. So those foods just are not healthy. So what is a processed food? I'm not going to get too much into that, but just think of, this is actually, I have this discussion with my students, and this is the way that I explain it to my students. If you're trying to decide if a food is real or not real, think about how the food is presented to you. If I have to open up a bag or a box, it probably is not real. Now I say probably because we do get some things in a bag that are real. For example, when I buy grapes, I buy a bunch of grapes, and that bunch of grapes typically comes in a bag if I am buying it at, like a food chain, like a Walmart or something like that. Now I can go to some local places where I live and get a bunch of grapes that really are not even sitting in a bag. They're just kind of sitting out, and I can have it put in a bag. So you have to be careful. Not everything that comes from a bag is fake, and not everything that comes from a bag is real. So we have to have those conversations. So real food typically does not come from a bag or a box, but it can. Real food, when I think of real food, it's typically food in its most natural state of being. So the way that it grows is the way that I'm going to see it. It hasn't been changed. It hasn't been ground down. It looks the way it would look naturally in nature. So going back to the grapes, the way that grows, the way I would see grapes on a vine is the way I'm pretty much going to see it when I purchase it. Same things with any other fruit or apples. Now, regardless of your thoughts on meat, the same is true for meat. So yes, it's been cut down and it's been, put into its specific and or different cuts, but it's the animal, and not much has been changed except for the fact that it has been put into a specific cut. So you do have to be careful about that, because if you're going into a grocery store, you can get meat that, you might think, oh, this is good, this is healthy, it's in its natural state, but be careful because you don't know what they might have added to it. Like if you, for example, I'm thinking specifically of, say, hamburger patties. I know a lot of times they're putting flour and other additives in there, so just be careful. I've recently started going to a local carniceria, and I'm able to get fresh cuts of meat right there. Nothing that's packaged. And actually in our local carniceria, they have a fruit and vegetable area as well. So we're oftentimes able to get, for our fruits and vegetables right there. So, those are examples of what's real food as opposed to a processed or fake food. So, we know the things that are really not healthy for us, things like chips and pretzels and candies, anything that's been processed. But another thing that we have to be careful about is even when you buy anything that's bottled and packaged, that might seem innocent, might not be so innocent. Like ketchup that has a whole lot of sugar in it. So it's salad dressings. We think of a salad dressing as that's healthy, but oftentimes it's not because of what they've put in it. So it's really beneficial to look at the labels and, know exactly what's in there, because something may be advertised as healthy and it's actually not healthy. So it's just important to know what you're eating and putting in your body, which is why I say if you focus on real food, that's going to be the healthiest. So regardless of, your beliefs on how you should eat, if, just vegetables and plant-based foods or whatever it is, focusing on real food is always going to be beneficial for your body. So just, if you can, try this summer and to reduce and minimize the amount of processed foods. I find that when I'm trying to establish a new habit, so, in this case, we're talking about establishing the habit of healthy eating, it's better for me and it's easier for me when I don't just plunge right into it. If I try to completely change my eating habits overnight, it's not very realistic, and for me, it sets me up for failure, and I think that's probably true for most people. You have to ease into these kinds of changes. So here is what I suggest. As you begin to establish a healthier lifestyle and specifically healthier eating habits this summer, just start by minimizing and reducing the amount of processed foods that you're eating. And maybe not even starting with the one that's the hardest for you, but just what can you realistically reduce and minimize right now that will benefit you. So let's say you drink Coke or some kind of sugary beverage. Can you minimize the amount? Maybe you drink 3 cans of Coke. Can you cut that down to 2 cans a day and try that for a week? And then after you do that for a week or two, then cut it down even more. Try something like that by minimizing and reducing to finally get it out of your body completely, because there's no debate that sugary beverages just are not good for us. But don't try to just take it out at once. Just start with a week challenge, and each preceding week reduce your intake of that even more. So whatever you feel like you can start with, that's realistic. Like I said, it doesn't have to be your biggest problem food. It could just be something that you feel like is realistic. Because what I found is that as I started reducing the quantity of processed foods that I was eating, it started to become easier. I think maybe as my body started to get used to it. So I started with reducing some of the processed foods that I was eating, and then just incorporating more real foods, more fruits and vegetables. My body just started then wanting more naturally those real foods, and it just became easier to not eat as much junk food or processed foods. So when I started, I was actually literally measuring out how much I was eating. So if I ate, rice or pasta, I would measure it out, because at that time I was also counting my calories, which I'm not doing, and nor am I suggesting you do, but that is what I was doing at the time. And to just be able to see how much I was eating, it really made a difference. I became more aware of, okay, if I eat this amount of food, then I'm going to consume this many carbs, this many calories. And just the very act of doing that, you become more conscious and aware. And when you're more conscious and aware, you're not just going to, shovel large amounts of food into your mouth, because you do have an awareness that maybe you didn't have before. So start with that, with minimizing and reducing. And as you're minimizing and reducing, and give yourself a plan, create a plan. Starting this week, I'm going to reduce this much, then the following week X amount, the following after that by this amount. But in the same time as you're reducing and minimizing, if you're taking things out, you do also want to be putting healthy foods in. That's the whole point. You want to start getting your body adapted to eating real food. So, increase your consumption every week by with healthy food. So maybe as I'm minimizing my junk food this week, I'm going to increase my intake of salads. Maybe that's my goal. Have some kind of goal. And then next week, as I'm minimizing even more and reducing even more of the junk food, I'm now increasing even more of my healthy real food. So if you put an actionable goal and really plan it out for your summer, looking at how many weeks of summer do you have, how long do you have until the fall. By the time you get to the school year, you will have minimized, reduced, and possibly even eliminated a lot of those unhealthy foods, at the same time increasing your healthy foods. So by the time fall gets here, you've already created some really good healthy eating habits that once it becomes a habit, you'll go into the brand new school year just automatically doing that, because you've created that habit. Whereas if you wait into the fall and say, in the fall, I'll definitely eat better by some miracle, right? Some by chance, right? But those things don't happen by chance. They usually happen by design, and that's what we're striving for. So that's my suggestion for creating a healthy eating habit. So let's look at our next healthy habit that we want to create and establish this summer so that by the fall, you're ready to go, you're already doing it, you're including it in your daily life so you don't have to think about it. So number 2 healthy habit is the habit of exercise. So you probably saw this coming if we're talking about habits and healthy habits. Exercise is something that we cannot forget. Absolutely cannot forget. So as I've spoken about in the past, you really have to look at what works for your lifestyle, for where you live, for the climate, for just what's possible for you. So when I started to begin to exercise again in my life, because when I was younger, I used to always exercise. Actually, since I was 16, I'd started going to a gym, had a membership at a gym, and I continued with that through my very young adult life and stopped, I don't know, at some point when maybe I was 25, 26, I'm not really sure. Maybe I was still doing it then, I don't know. But definitely by the time I came here, I had stopped going to a gym, although I continued to work out at home for a while. But then I stopped that, and so when I wanted to, a couple years ago, get back into the healthy habit of exercising, I had to look at what was feasible for me, what would work for me and my lifestyle and where I am. I'm in the second largest city of Mexico, and I just, I don't always feel comfortable. I don't even always feel safe going into the city to exercise, especially if I'm alone. So when I started thinking about what can I do realistically during the school year, well, I can't leave and go on an early morning walk because simply I just don't feel safe. I do not feel safe doing that. Maybe I would be safe, but I absolutely do not feel like, for me, that it's safe to get up at 4:30 in the morning, which is the time I do get up to exercise, to get up at 4:30 in the morning and go walking, even though there's a park very close to my house. I don't feel safe doing that. So exercising outside of my house, unless I'm going to a gym, it probably isn't feasible. And I didn't feel like going to a gym was very feasible. It's feasible. I can go to a gym. There are gyms close to me. But basically, I don't drive myself, so I can take an Uber. But I don't know that I necessarily want to spend money on an Uber several times a week to get to the gym, nor do I even want the hassle of going to a gym. I'm kind of the person who it needs to be super easy for me to do it. So what did I decide on? I decided that I needed to do exercise here in my house. So I did. That's what I started doing. I started doing YouTube videos because there are a ton of free videos, exercise videos that you can look up. So I just basically decided on a time, and morning for me is what works. So I get up first thing in the morning and I do my exercise, and I started with YouTube videos. And after a while, I wanted to expand and buy an elliptical exercise machine. So I did that. I wasn't going to start off investing all kinds of money. That's kind of how I am in general. I like to dabble and experiment. And then if I feel like, okay, I'm going to make this thing a thing, then I will invest in it. Similar to my podcast, as I started this, which is why, I if you listen to my announcement prior to the show, I got a little ahead of myself, and I thought I was going to have to change. I thought I was going to have problems with the audio files. Turns out I didn't. Everything was fine. But anyway, if you did listen to that announcement, you know that I've since changed to a different podcast host, and now I'm paying for the service. Whereas when I started with a free service, but I used up all my space, which is what prompted me to, I could have stayed with that host and paid for a subscription, but I had to, knowing that now I'm going to pay, I really want to make sure I'm going with the best provider for my needs, for my personal podcast needs. But that's pretty much how I do things. I don't jump in and invest a lot of money on something, I want to make sure that I'm going to stick with it, that I enjoy it, that I'm making this thing a real thing. And then once I've proven that to myself, then I will actually go in and invest. So same is true with the equipment. I didn't invest money into exercise equipment until after I'd started with my YouTube videos and it created a routine for me. So once it was habit, I had this habit of getting up in the morning and exercising, and I proved to myself that, yeah, this is something I can do. Then I went and I got the equipment. But I really feel like anything you can do, you can start off pretty much free and not having to put a whole lot of money. So having said all that, my suggestion is think about your school year. Even though right now you probably have a lot of free time, you can exercise whenever you want. What we're trying to do right now is establish and create habits that you can carry on into the new school year. So you don't want to create a habit that's not going to work for you once the school year starts. So if I'm exercising at, 12 in the afternoon right now, that works really great for right now, but it probably won't work great in the school year. So think about a time that's going to be doable right now, but also doable in the fall. So for me, it's the morning. Now, I've already stated that I get up at 4:30 in the morning to do my exercise. So basically during the school year, I do my workout first thing in the morning. I get up, I go do my exercise. It is habit, it is routine, it is not something that I have to think about. However, now that I'm on summer vacation, am I still getting up at 4:30? No, I'm not. I'm not getting up at 4:30 in the morning. And I'm not promoting that you have to get yourself up any earlier than you normally would. But if you're like me and first thing in the morning, sorry for that bell, it's the trash man going by in the background. So if you're like me and you're getting up first thing in the morning, you continue that routine on your summer vacation. First thing in the morning during my summer is going to look a little bit different than it looks during the school year. So during the school year, it's 4:30 in the morning. Right now, it's more like 6 o'clock. My summer has just started, so I'm still getting up around 6 o'clock in the morning. So then I get up and I do my exercise. So decide on a time that's going to work for you now, or more or less a time frame. So for you, it's before school, first thing in the morning. You do that first thing in the morning. Even if you need to start easing into it, which is really what I suggest. I don't suggest going in 7 days a week to do this. Start right now and maybe say, okay, this week I am going to exercise 3 days and have those days decided. You need to know which days you're doing it because it's much too easy to just, I'll do it, whatever, any 3 days. Have the 3 days decided. Have the time frame more or less decided. Is it first thing in the morning? Is it right before you shower at night? If you shower at night, I don't. Whatever works for you and your lifestyle. Choose that, start with 3 days, and then for the next several weeks, you want to add on to that. Maybe you're not even adding on to your days, but you're adding on to your time because, we don't want to hit this too hard because it will cause burnout. So maybe my 3 days this week are 3 days of 10 minutes at a time on the elliptical because that's what I would do. That is what I do, except more than 15 minutes. And from there, or maybe it's 15 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes. Next week, maybe I'm still at 3 days a week, but now I've increased my time by maybe another 5 to minutes. And then the following week, maybe I'm ready to add on an additional day, or maybe I'm still adding on time. You have to figure out what's realistic for you, what works for you and your lifestyle, but look at your weeks in the summer and plan it out accordingly. Start slow and then add on so that by the time fall hits, you have established an exercise routine that you can carry through in the fall. So in the fall, when you're super busy with all the, crazy beginning of the school year chaos that we go through, and there will be an episode to help us get ready for that as well during this series. But when all that craziness is happening, you're not having to try to fit in exercise or find a time, because it won't happen then. It absolutely will not happen then. It's got to happen at a time when you have the time. You never really have the time. Now is the time. So create that habit, and then in the fall, at the beginning of the school year, you are going to thank yourself for it. The next and last habit I'm going to talk about is the habit of good sleep. So while I have talked about this before in the past, it was really just to kind of focus on the importance of getting good sleep and enough sleep, whereas right now I'm going to talk about strategies to help actually create the habit of getting really good sleep. And we all know why sleep is important, but I do want to mention that when you are getting enough sleep and when you're getting good sleep, you completely feel the difference. I mean, I think so many of us have been sleep deprived for years that we have maybe forgotten just how we feel when we get good rest. You can think about your own experience, but clearly if you're coming and starting your school day after having gotten just a few hours of sleep, your whole day is very difficult. Whereas if you've gotten good sleep and you have rested well, your day is a much easier day because you have the energy. And because you have the energy and you feel better, you also enjoy your day more. So I've also mentioned in the past that I have a ridiculously early bedtime of 8:30. I'm not promoting that that's the best bedtime hour. That's just what works for me. I think everyone has to find what works for them in their schedule. So the reason why my bedtime is 8:30 is because I also get about 4:30 in the morning, and that's when I do my workout. Generally speaking, this is during the school year, non-vacation time. So how can you establish good sleeping habits? Well, there are a few things that you can do. First of all, I suggest that you really, really know who you are as a sleeper, and I mean this in terms of how much sleep do you need. So I don't mean how little sleep can you get away with. I mean, how much sleep do you actually need to feel good the following day, to feel that you really got enough rest, that you can function and think well the next day. So I know we hear all the time that we need 8 hours of sleep, but 8 hours is a rough estimate. Most of us do need somewhere around 8 hours. Some of us are fine with 7 hours and we feel fully rested, we feel good, we can thrive on 7 hours. For some of us, it is 8 hours. For some of us, it is 9 hours. So you have to really know what is the number of hours that you actually need so that you feel well the following day and you function well and you think well. Once you know yourself as a sleeper, then you need to figure out your schedule. So knowing how many hours you need is going to help you figure out what time you need to go to sleep, and that way you can get up at the time that you need to get up and have had enough hours to get your full night's sleep. So I know this can be a little bit difficult, at least, in the beginning. And the reason for this is because many of us as adults are not actually used to having a bedtime. We just sort of hop into bed when we start feeling tired, and that might work. I mean, that might work for some, but for most of us, if we don't have a specific time that we're going to sleep, then it's going to be a lot more difficult to ensure that we get enough sleep each night. So my number one piece of advice is to give yourself bedtime. As silly as it sounds, and you don't have to let anyone else know about it. Nobody has to know. everyone in my life knows, because I'm not very quiet about it, very open about the fact that I have an 8:30 bedtime. And I know, of course, if you have small children at home, it might be a little more challenging. Maybe your ideal bedtime is not going to be realistic. Well, if you have really, really young children, it actually might be, because very young children tend to have early bedtimes, so that could actually still work with you. But it really does depend on the factors at home, what's happening, how old your children are, if you have children, if you don't have children. So you have to figure out what's realistic, and then pick a bedtime that's going to work for you, and stick to this bedtime. Stick to it. So I'll kind of share how I keep my 8:30 bedtime, which, granted, as I think I've said in the past, in the springtime, it always becomes more challenging for me to keep my 8:30 bedtime. I'm very honest about this. Well, I'm in bed at before 8:30, because I'm very tired well before then, and I have my reading time before my bedtime. So anyway, so in the springtime, it's very hot. We are down in Mexico, so it's very, very hot. We don't have AC, and it just gets very difficult to sleep. Plus, I find in the spring, my mind and body is already thinking, oh, it's close to the end of the school year. If I lose a couple hours of sleep, I'll be fine. And of course, I'm not. I'm not fine if I lose sleep. I'm just not, which is the whole reason why I started having my early bedtime of 8:30. So make sure that you have a bedtime and stick to that bedtime. Now, I've heard, as I mentioned before, I listen a lot to Gretchen Rubin, Happier with Gretchen Rubin, I believe her podcast is called, and she has lots of tips, and I really look to her podcast for getting these little life hacks and tips that she provides. But one thing that she mentioned a while ago that I really liked, I haven't needed to do it, but I think this would be a great tip if you are starting out, is to actually set a timer. So set yourself a timer when, this is the time that I need to start getting myself ready for bed. If that helps you, then set a timer, at least while you're making this a habit. So have a bedtime. You can set yourself a timer to help remind you that now I need to start getting ready for bed. That brings us to the next thing. Having something that you regularly do right before bedtime can help you to just kind of relax your body and get yourself kind of into ready to sleep routine. So whatever that might be. Again, I heard one tip on a podcast, and it mentioned, even actually prior to your bedtime, kind of reducing the lights in your house. So start dimming lights if you have a light dimmer, or turning lights off, closing the blinds or the drapes. Just start to darken your house, and this is going to help you to get your body ready for your bedtime, knowing that sleep is about to come. And then other things, like I'm sure we all have very similar routines to, washing our face and, just the act of changing into your pajamas. I do that actually well before my bedtime. Boy, sometimes I do that when I get home. I just like to be comfortable. But I will take off my makeup and do all of that a couple hours actually before my bedtime, because for me it just makes the whole act of getting into bed easier, because it's not such a big production. But anything that helps you make that transition from being awake and getting yourself ready for bed, that is something that you can do to help make that a habit. And then another thing that I've heard before, again, it was probably some kind of life hack about sleeping, or maybe it was losing weight, about keeping your room a little bit cool. So when your bedroom is cool, it just kind of sets, it sets a good condition for you to sleep in. That's why I have such a hard time sleeping in the spring. You may be in a similar situation or not, but if you are like me, I can only control my environment so much. I only have fans. I don't have AC, so it's difficult. So in the really, really warm months of the year and seasons of the year, there's very little that I can do to actually manipulate the environment around me, the climate around me. But if you can, that is an excellent way to help you so that you just cool your room, and that is going to help you to sleep better. Some people are very sensitive to lights. My husband is like that. He has to have it pitch black in the room. So little tweaks that you can do to your environment like that is going to help you. So if you have something that gives off light, cover it, close doors if you need to, make it as dark as you need to if that helps you. Also, I'd like to say, if you are exercising, which I have suggested, that's one of the healthy habits that really is going to be beneficial for you. Right now it's summer vacation, and we're not necessarily going to be going to bed or needing to go to bed as early as we do during the school year. That's true for me. I do not need to be in bed at 8:30 during summer vacation like I do need to be during the school year. But what is important and what will help as you're trying to establish healthy sleeping patterns and habits this summer is still sticking somewhat to a bedtime and getting up at a specific time. Now, if maybe in the school year, maybe your bedtime isn't as crazy as mine, so maybe it would work. Let's say maybe you go to bed or will plan to go to bed around 10 o'clock at night. If that works for you, then that's something that might still be doable right now in the summer, 10 or 11 o'clock. But just having start planning a summer bedtime that's going to be more or less close to what you can do in the fall, and then a time to get up in the morning that again will be more or less what you will be doing in the fall. It doesn't have to be exact to the fall, but what you're basically trying to do right now is to create a schedule so that you're getting a certain number of hours of sleep every single night. You're establishing that as a habit, and then that's going to be fairly close to what you'll be doing in the fall when the new school year starts. That way, when the fall does come, you will be able to adjust it to that time. What I like to do, and this is what I do, so right now, I'm not going to bed at 8:30. That's just crazy during the summer. So I am going to bed more or less 10:30, 11, and getting up by 6 or 7. So that works for me now, but towards the end of the summer, I am going to anticipate the way my schedule is going to change. So in that last week of summer vacation, before I go back, I'm going to start transitioning a little at a time and adjusting my bedtime to closer to what it's going to be. So, every night during that last week, I might, go to bed 15 minutes earlier, wake up 15 minutes earlier, something like that. That's what I've done in the past. For me, it's been helpful, just kind of trying to adjust my bedtime slowly and just ease back into that. But it's really important that when on the weekends and vacations that you are not completely disrupting your normal routines. That's why I say, even though I realize your bedtime, once you establish it right now, might look a little bit different than the fall, you don't want to go too far away from what it is going to be, because then it makes transitioning a little bit more difficult. Not impossible, but it will make it a little more difficult. So we want to create something that we are going to be able to sustain and carry on through the school year, because once the school year starts, we are going to be, thrown into the busyness of the beginning of the school year. So we want these good habits already established and set in place. So that's basically my advice for establishing really good sleeping habits is have a bedtime for yourself. And if you need to set a timer to let yourself know that, okay, now it's time for me to start getting ready for bed, do that. And then also have a set time that you're going to be getting up in the morning over vacation. Be rigid with this. Follow it, because this is what's going to help you as you ease into the fall. And again, just keep in mind all the tips that can help you, help make having a bedtime a little bit easier, like dimming the lights, having some kind of routine before you go to bed. If you can adjust the temperature in your room to keep it cool. I read an article that I'll include in the show notes. It suggests somewhere between 60 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit. That was its recommendation. Reducing the light in your room, all of those are really good things. Also, you want to think about your consumption of caffeine during the day. If you're someone who's very sensitive to caffeine, like my husband is, but it seems like, I guess he's sensitive to lots of things, light, caffeine, but if he has caffeine after 12 o'clock in the afternoon, he will not be able to sleep. Whereas caffeine for me really doesn't, I don't drink a whole lot of caffeine, even though by my students I'm known as the coffee lover. Truth is, I only have about 2 cups of coffee a day, and typically I am finished with that by noon. So I'm not really consuming a lot of caffeine. So you need to know yourself, and you need to know if you are sensitive to caffeine or not. What can your body tolerate? And just being careful about the consumption of caffeine later in the afternoon, because if you are someone who's more sensitive to it, it's definitely going to affect you, and it's going to affect your sleep at night. So just be very careful about that. Another quick note before I conclude here, which I have mentioned, but just a quick note on napping. I really suggest be very careful with your napping during the day, because naps can really make it difficult for you to sleep at night. So if you're going to nap, I would try for a 10-15 minute power nap, but I would not do anything more than that. As I've already said, I used to be in the very bad habit of coming home and napping for 2 hours. It was very time consuming. That's 2 hours of my afternoon. That's a lot in the afternoon. And again, like I said, I think the habit of napping every day perpetuated my body's need to have this afternoon nap, but it was getting really bad. I say really bad because, who wants to be sleeping for 2 hours? I mean, I love sleeping. I would love to be able to sleep 2 hours if I didn't feel like, I have a family, so if I'm sleeping for 2 hours, that's a lot out of my family time, considering it's already limited because all of us are busy during the day. So I really need that afternoon time to be present and with my family. So that's a priority for me. So I would just be very, very careful about the naps that you take. Maybe try not to take it, or just take a power nap in the afternoon if you feel like you have to. Other than that, I would just be very careful with the napping, because it could jeopardize your sleep at night. So that's going to conclude today's episode. First things first, you don't miss next week's episode 7, entitled "It's a Digital Mess, Time to Clean Up." Next week we'll look at all the digital things that you should be doing over the summer so that you are well prepared for the brand new school year. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you found today's episode helpful. If you did, I'd love to hear from you. Keep listening. In a moment, I'll give you a few different ways you can contact me. Until next time. Wait a minute. Wait 1 minute. Before you go, don't forget you can catch our show notes online at www.timetoteach.libsyn. That's libsyn.com. We're also on Facebook at Time to Teach. Don't forget to check out our Facebook group, Teachers for Effective Curriculum. And if you're an educator with your own podcast show, I invite you to join our brand new Facebook group, Teachers Who Podcast. Let's grow a community where we can network, problem solve, and discuss anything and everything podcast related. I'll see you there.